the nervous system. We talk about this a lot in manifestation work. So when we talk about regulating, it's the small tools we can implement to help bring us back to that grounded sense of self at our center.
From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacey Phillips.
And your host, Jessica Gill.
As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Expanded. Jessica here. So we're going to kick off this episode by dropping into our bodies for a second. Wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, whether you're on the go or seated or walking around or driving, just feel into your body for a second. Maybe put your hand on your heart, another one on your stomach. Tune into any sensations coming up. And take a deep, long inhale, filling up your belly. And one more breath in. And release with a long sigh. You can keep repeating that breath a few more times as I go into the intro, but I just wanted to set you off on a calm note before we jump in today, as our episode is all about regulating the nervous system. Before we jump in today, I just have a couple of announcements. So we have our big summer sale going on right now where you can join our membership for $96 off. We also happen to be kicking off our summer challenge, helping you get out of your own way and overcoming your biggest block in 30 days. If you are someone who has been repeating patterns, is stuck with their tests and triggers, can't seem to get to the other side of their manifestation, struggling to feel embodied once they get to their manifestation, or struggling to feel embodied in the route towards unblocking, this challenge is going to be so huge for you. We are utilizing our top tools in this manifestation work to really take a hyper-focused look at the biggest block that's presenting in your life right now. The one that's presenting right now is the one that is being asked to be looked at and to heal in a deeper way. We're utilizing a lot of somatic experiencing exercises, regulation tools for the nervous system, parts work, EMDR-informed techniques. We even did a collaboration with Nicole's Neuroscience, who you'll hear in this episode as well, to help make sure we're utilizing the best techniques to help you overwrite those old limiting beliefs and step into the new empowering ones, including, if you've checked out the pre-week, a couple of tips on how to boost your neuroplasticity during this time as well. So if you join the membership, you get free access to the challenge. If you are up for renewal, you'll get a special renewal offer in your email. And join us. It's going to be so powerful. We had our community walk last week. It was so beautiful seeing everyone in person and seeing everyone's intention going into this. It's going to be such a profound shift on the other side. Take that intention, really think about your why here. And I can't wait to see what unfolds for all of you on the other side. We have a link in the show notes where you can record a voice note and share with us what's coming up for you in the challenge. What are you manifesting? What are you overcoming? Share it with us, and we'll pick a few to share on the podcast in the coming weeks. Again, our summer sale is going on right now, $96 off. So if you've been thinking about joining, now is the time. Week 1 of our challenge starts on Monday, May 27th, and we can't wait to see you guys in there.
And now a word from our partners.
One major manifestation the TBM team has had over the years is switching all of our platforms, workshops, and memberships over to Kajabi. Kajabi is an all-in-one business platform for entrepreneurs. It makes it easy to build, market, and sell your online courses, your membership sites, coaching programs, and so much more. You don't need to worry about coding or plugins or any broken integrations. It syncs up every single piece of the puzzle. Before, we had to have like 4 different platforms and websites, none of which communicated well to each other in order to have our online membership. Now everything is on Kajabi. All of our membership, we even have our own custom app on there, and our incredible community group, which they're continuing to add new features to all the time. So if you are someone who's looking to take their community group or website or membership or digital products online and start selling them, you can do that from zero to launch in a matter of days with Kajabi, even customizing it to your exact design needs. It is your one-stop shop for website, funnels, emails, landing pages, analytics, payments, and so much more. I cannot recommend it enough. It is so easy to use and so incredible to be able to offer all of this on one platform. If you want to try out Kajabi risk-free for 30 days, go to the link in the show notes. Our To Be Magnetic campaign offer allows you to try for 30 days for free. Test it out, see if it works for you. I promise you will not look back. It is the best choice you can make for an online business.
All right, on to the episode.
The nervous system, how to regulate. We talk about this a lot in manifestation work because, as we know, the body keeps the score. And so as we talk a lot about overriding our limiting beliefs, our beliefs are also tied to a bodily felt experience, which is how it connects to our nervous system. And the language of the nervous system is somatics. So soma is a Greek word meaning the body. So somatics is the language of the body. What is the felt sense and experience in the body? And if you've ever done a deep imagining with us, you know the first half, the induction part of our deep imaginings, is all about dropping into the body's felt experience through breath work, through touch, through grounding into our 5 senses. We have a few different practices in there in everyday eye to help us ground into that somatic experience. Now, you might be asking, how does the language of the body and how we feel in our bodies and somatic relate to manifestation? Well, if you think about the 3 pillars of the To Be Magnetic manifestation process, you have expanding, taking aligned action, and unblocking. All 3 have to be in motion in order to connect with our manifestations. So when you are taking aligned action, when you are unblocking those limiting beliefs that are keeping us held back, and even when connecting with expanders or being open to meeting expanders, our nervous system is signaling to us, are we in a state of threat where we tend to lean on the coping mechanisms of a fight or flight or freeze or fawn? Or are we grounded and safe in our bodies in this moment and safe to receive the expansion, safe to take the aligned action, safe to unblock? And that's where the nervous system really comes into place. It's helping our bodies feel safe to go to this next level of either unblocking, aligned action, expansion. And if you remember from our challenge last year, we talked a lot about the magnetic self, the self that we were born as, that's within us, that didn't experience any pain, shame, or programming. It's our higher self. And there are certain pillars of that magnetic self. And one of those pillars is a grounded sense of self. When you are listening to your intuition, it is that calm guidance and inner knowing. And so if we can connect back with our grounded self, if we can connect back with our regulated, calm nervous system, then we can actually approach our manifestation work and go so much deeper with it. That is why week 1 of this year's challenge, we are focusing on getting grounded, on understanding when we are in a place of stress, when we are tested, when we are triggered. How can we both understand what patterns our nervous system tends to lean into, right? What coping responses or trauma responses it tends to lean into. And what little tools can we signal towards our body to help it regulate? Now, we have a bunch of them in the challenge, but you're going to hear a lot in the episode today as well. And they can be as simple as a quick breath work exercise like we did at the top of this episode, or feeling into the body. You're going to hear from a lot of different experts on their approaches with it. And I think maybe even as you're listening, journal down ones that appeal to you. We're not going to be in that regulated state all the time. You're going to hear Janelle talk about this too. It's okay to go into those activated states where you are going for a workout and you need to kind of be in that fight mode or that flight mode. You want to activate. Or if there is a real threat, like a car is coming at you and you're crossing the sidewalk and you need to get out of the way, you need to tap into that flight mode. But then you're going to come back down to your grounded sense of self. And so how can we go back to those grounded sense of self instead of living in these dysregulated states when there isn't an actual threat there? So when we talk about regulating, it's the small tools we can implement to help bring us back to that grounded sense of self at our center. It helps to build our window of tolerance. So when we experience stressors, we're more resilient to things because we can bounce back to the regulated space more and more often. And you might also hear us talk about resourcing in this episode. Resourcing is collecting that toolkit. What are all of the pieces and tools and tricks, whether that's breath work or the DIs, the fight, flight DI, the freeze, fawn DI, which we're launching in week 1 of the challenge, to help bring you back. So when you're in that moment and you're not used to using these protocols on a regular basis, look at that resourcing list and say, okay, which one can I choose because I'm feeling dysregulated in my nervous system? So let's dive into the episode. You're going to learn way more about the 4 main states that cue us into that dysregulated states and a lot of tips and tools of how to get out of it. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Keep listening back over and over again and take notes to think about which ones you can try to implement on a regular basis. And one other thing I just want to name, I know I've been talking about these trauma responses, but just to give like a little overview. So basically, when someone has an emotional traumatic response, their nervous system can respond in one of these 4 ways. These are just like the main 4: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fight would be rage, anger, bullying, intimidation. It comes out as like projection, like I'm mad and it must be this other person's fault, right? Flight is panic, worrying, rumination, perfectionism. It's physical flight, like leaving, booking it out of town. It could even be ghosting. It's I'm getting out of this situation. I'm not dealing with the sensation, the feeling. Freeze is disassociation. It could even be anger as well, but that's the numbness, the stuckness, the lack of mobility, unable to take that step forward. And then fawn is no boundaries, codependency, people pleasing. Basically, their strategy is I'm just going to like concede to whatever the needs of the people are around me because I don't feel safe to honor my own. And all of these responses are birthed out of very real ways of trying to protect you. And so if we think about them as like, okay, our nervous system learned that this was actually a good coping tool for when our body is overwhelmed with a big emotion or a really scary, dangerous situation. Just think about and get curious. When I'm feeling desperate, which one of these tends to pop up? You know, which archetype tends to pop up? And just in the moment, what nervous system response is coming in right now? What am I feeling into? My body automatically went there. It wasn't a conscious thought, you know, so I automatically went there. Let's just get curious, like, ooh, I'm feeling a lot of flight energy. I'm feeling that dreamer. I'm wanting to fantasize and not take any action. You know, I'm feeling that freeze. So just get curious about that. Where is that coming from? What response is that pulling up for you?
Yeah. And from there, making sure to regulate and then get to the bottom of it.
Yes.
Through something as simple as the trigger DI or the unblock DI. God, that's what all of this work is. It's really, really investigating and peeling the layers to get to your authenticity.
I have definitely been in that state before where I'm like, it's almost like your brain wants to go into panic mode. I think the more that you can practice that grounding of the nervous system, whether it's with a safe DI or any of the ones in the calming section, the reset DI, like move your body, shake your hands, mobilize the energy out of you so you don't get stuck in that, like you said, the loop. Because if you can recognize, like, this is just a sensation I'm feeling. This is just a physical sensation I'm feeling. And if I can just calm my nervous system, I can figure out a solution through this, whether that's detaching from outcome, whether that's a creative solution to get out of a certain financial state or whatever it is. Allow your body to calm so then the true you can come back online. When it comes to the nervous system and the dysregulated state and the regulated state, what does it mean when someone's nervous system is chronically on in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response?
So I think it's important just to say that we circle in and out of them all the time. And where it becomes problematic is when we get stuck in a certain state. And it's basically like if our sailboat was like going down a little river and then it gets stuck into almost like a rip current and the boat can't get back in the actual stream. So somebody could go into more of an activated response and not be stuck. Like they're in more of a sympathetic state or parasympathetic state, but that's normal. They're still in a zone of regulation. It's really when they get chronically stuck there, that's what we're talking about when someone's nervous system is dysregulated. With that said, when someone's stuck in a fight state, fight is pretty obvious. It's kind of what you think of, right? Somebody is just way more aggressive, jumpy, frustrated, a lot of activation there. When someone is stuck in a flight state, this is more interesting because I feel like this one I see more, and maybe just like because I work more primarily with women, but that's more where they are in like overworking, perfectionism, panic, fear, anxiety, kind of overthinking. They're just stuck where they're just looping. So that would be more of like stuck in a flight state. So those are the two sympathetic states. The two parasympathetic states are the freeze and the fawn, but also you can go back and forth from these states as well. You can be stuck in both. So being in the freeze response is more where you see depression, shutdown, isolation, fatigue, a lot of self-doubt. Freeze is really interesting because underneath the freeze response is a fight or flight response that's stuck. So under a freeze response, there is going to be, when you uncover it, you go into more of a flight response or a fight response. That's actually what's underneath a freeze response. When I'd work with people with depression, it was always like, okay, what are you angry about? Because when you can really get under it, you could start unpacking and then they would move basically from freeze into more of the fight or flight response, and then go back into the ventral vagal, which is basically like our connected, happy, compassionate, joyful state, our actual selves. And the fawning, that's more of your people pleaser. So somebody that is honestly just avoiding their needs, trying to fix another person, managing other people's emotions, needing to save other people, lack of boundaries. There's actually like a lot of fear underneath them. And so how they manage their fear is by going into a fawning response, like the fixing and the pleasing.
It's interesting too, because I think, a lot of people might identify as a people pleaser or caretaking to others, but when you're kind of stuck in that state, it's this more tense taking care of. It's not like in that moment I people pleased and I said this thing. It's like your whole body, you can feel it's like a little more shut down in that response versus just like, okay, I didn't really state my needs fully in that moment. That doesn't mean you're necessarily in fawn, but it's like when your nervous system's locked up, the only way out feels like if you just take care of everything in the room sort of dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just one quick question for you guys, just curious. Do you happen to notice a certain state that maybe when you were younger or even now that you tend to go to more, or multiple states that you go to more, like when you're in that stress situation or up against a test or a trigger or your blocks come up? Do you find yourself leaning to one state over others?
Yes. Yes, I do, Jessica. So growing up, I've shared this before, I grew up in a very high religious culture. And in that high religious culture, women being in a fight response specifically was very, very shamed. Like women are supposed to be, we are supposed to be sweet and kind and pleasing and small and neat, all of those things, right? And there's some beautiful traits in that, but it doesn't encompass the whole person, which is why I think I'm so passionate about being a whole person. And so for me, as a little girl, I knew I wouldn't be accepted if I was in my more of a fight response or flight response. So I had to learn really early how to override that in my system, which then would lead to more of, for me, a fawning response more than a freeze response. And so that totally is my Achilles heel that I've had to do a lot of healing work around to go, oh my gosh, all of that information where I was getting angry and then I'd shame myself for getting angry was really my soul, my intuition, my everything trying to protect me. But I learned how to override that. And so now it's like, oh my gosh, when I'm angry, it's sacred. It's like sacred information. And of course, why anger gets a bad rap is because people can be really abusive and completely inappropriate in their anger. So I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about being with your own emotions and not shaming yourself if you feel like, oof, something's there, to be able to actually track it and be with it and get curious about it and absolutely behave in a way that's in line with your values and your integrity, but don't write off that. So that's so much for me. I think of so many things in my life, that pain and different things I could have avoided had I paid attention to my fight response. So yes, to answer your question, I go to a fawning response.
What about you, Lise?
Yeah, so when I am triggered most often, I would say I go to a fawn response as well, in a different way. More of, did I do something wrong? Oh my gosh, I hurt, it's that people pleasing from that thing. Like, I've done something wrong. What do I do? I'm in trouble, that thing. And then I probably move over to a flight. It's like stress and blah, 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 but it's like, how do I ditch out of here and get away? So those would be the two I oscillate between the most during triggers, for sure.
What about you, Jessica? Do you have one?
Definitely. I think I probably most identify with flight. And it's interesting because as we're going through the challenge, we're going to be pulling apart all the pieces there. Flight in terms of, how do I sprint past the whatever signals my body's sending me to like finish the task list in my mind. And that is like, okay, I'll be safe when I get all of this done. And then I can be like, check, gold star, now I can rest. I'm bypassing those moments. And it's interesting, like this year I started putting in scheduled breaks so I can intentionally be like, don't bypass, the break is going to help you. It's going to make you more effective. Take the break. So that definitely, especially around, and I think back to school when there's that, oh, I did something wrong. It goes to that people pleasing. Oh my God, what did I do? Like, is someone mad at me? How do I fix this? Whatever. I will also say, though, with my romantic relationships, and I'm thinking of all of them, when like we have arguments or something comes up, I could see the fight response coming up more there. Like that's where I feel more empowered. I can speak my needs there the most versus anywhere else. I don't do that.
Agreed. Same.
What are some tools or maybe even ways that you kind of check yourself or guide others to check themselves when they're trying to really understand, wait, what am I actually feeling? What is the feeling going on here?
I really, really love this question, Jessica, in so many ways, because I think naturally we do go to that step of expressing it, right? What is the word? How do I describe what it is that I'm feeling? And the reality, I think, for most of us is, when we are under supported in our emotions, it's often at a time where we don't have language. For many of us, and again, speaking from my own personal experience, it is really difficult to know the label of what it is that I'm feeling. As I often do, I like to break down change, the process of healing in a way for most of us, into 2 steps. And the first step as it applies to this conversation is first becoming aware of the sensations in our body, because that's where emotions live. Our energy shifts, it changes. We feel things happening in our physical vessels. So to simplify that step, it would be becoming conscious of our physical body, that step of reconnecting with our physical self before we even enter into the second section, which is the emotional piece of things. So becoming conscious, learning to talk about or to label the sensations before we even apply the feeling that might connect to, learning how to just be in our own presence with what is going on in our physical body. And for so many of us, the first step actually then begins with reconnecting with our physical body, especially, again, if we were under supported in childhood. We do what a lot of us do. We avoid our physical sensations. We learn how to disconnect or dissociate, like I like to call living on my spaceship. So for me, it was really reconnecting, becoming conscious of my human form before I could then begin to say, okay, this is the language of the feeling that is happening in my physical body.
Such a good point. Yeah. And you have great exercises in there, especially check-ins of like this time of day. What are the sensations going on in my body when I wake up before I grab my phone or look at the sun or my meditation, whatever you choose to do first thing? What's the sensations already coming up? And then it's almost like a roadmap to, okay, so does that connect to the beliefs that you're looping behind? Does that connect to, the worry that you have about the day? But that first checkpoint being what's happening in my body and regulating that, I think is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go back to the reality that some of us might be starting with the behavior, right? With what we're doing. We're exploding, we're screaming, we're yelling, or you might find yourself like me. I'm disconnected. I've avoided the situation. I've fled. I've left the room. I've shut the person down or whatever it is. So I do want to speak to the reality that for so many of us, that's our starting point. We catch ourselves maybe in the action of reacting, or oftentimes after the fact, oftentimes feeling very shameful after the fact of what we've done. But that could be our starting point, because understanding that those explosive, whether we're exploding outward or we're turning inward with those emotions, the behavior, the reaction that you very beautifully brought up is connected to how we were feeling, to that deeper discomfort. So for so many of us, it means, starting there, kind of seeing after the fact and witnessing those patterns without judging them, understanding that they are, coming from an attempt at safety. Again, when we were in that pre-verbal stage, when we didn't have the attuned caregiver to hold space, to be curious, to help us make sense and give us language about what we were feeling, and then find an appropriate, connected way to deal with it, we learned, we adapted. And so many of us into our adulthood carry on those habitual coping mechanisms. And again, we shame ourselves because they do cause ourselves harm. They cause our loved ones harm. But if we can, again, expand in compassion, which is why I'm always talking about the physiology, the nervous system, kind of where these things are originating from, then I think we can give ourselves the opportunity to even just start there. Okay, I am someone who explodes. I don't know exactly what's happening in my body, but I can have some language now for the reality that I didn't feel safe in what is happening in my body. So I felt like I had to project it outward, or I had to turn it inward, or I had to avoid it. And then we can almost start building the pieces backward in that way.
Yeah, I think definitely in my own healing journey, I know after I'm like, ooh, I should have taken a pause. I should have stepped back before that happened. And it's the practice of recognizing as soon as you can, really, where did something shift? Where do I no longer, things started spiraling out, and then take it step by step backwards until recognizing the physiological shift immediately is going to be your first cue.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you saying that. And I think it's important to speak to that because we set up this expectation that we are conscious in real time and sensing these shifts in our body so that we can pause and be responsive. And in the lived experience of life, that's just not what happens. What happens more often the time is we reconnect with our consciousness, somewhere after the fact. And if we can, again, be compassionate observers of what's happening, we can then create an opportunity to hit pause, to be able to attune to my body, be in its own presence, sense what I may be feeling in terms of the sensations, and have that bit of space now in real time to show up responsively and compassionately and in a connected way.
One tip my therapist gave me is recognizing whatever part of the journey where you feel activated, say, okay, the only thing I need to do here is go and take a pause and calm my nervous system down. And at first I was like, well, shouldn't I figure out why I'm feeling that way? Or she goes, your prefrontal cortex isn't online. You don't have the capacity to do that at that moment. So if you can just remember to exit and self-soothe for a moment, that's going to be your best chance at rewiring that pattern. Are there any other tools or tips that you would suggest for someone like when they're in that elevated state, whether they're disassociating or whether they're projecting out anger, or maybe they're even just like so upset with someone, resentment's bubbling up, or anger internally and they're turning it inward, which is another thing that happens to people too?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge your therapist for giving you a very, good piece of advice and piece of information, physiological information about how our brain functions. And we don't have access to that moment of different awareness. We don't, and that's why so many of us rely on those ways that you just beautifully stated, that the old ways that we've once dealt with it. When our prefrontal cortex isn't online, we can't see a new solution. That beautiful solution that you might have even talked about with that therapist last Tuesday, right, in session, you don't actually have access to that in real time, which is why we return to those past solutions, screaming, yelling, dissociating, leaving, or whatever it is. And I think that another helpful suggestion, and this is, I think, often counterintuitive and maybe not what we like to hear, begins outside of those moments, begins with caring for our nervous system, with understanding that we do have a nervous system, and that ability to maintain connection to the pause, to the prefrontal cortex, to all of the new different solutions that you want to embody to make that change happens when our nervous system is in a calm state of grounded, peaceful regulation. And I'll be the first to admit, I spent decades of my life the farthest from that grounded, peaceful state. So for a lot of us, it's the more preventative, I think is the language listeners might have heard, care of our bodies, making sure that we're getting and giving it the nutrients that we have access to that it needs, making sure sleep is incredibly important, that it's getting prioritized just as much as sleep, restful moments throughout our day. I mean, we live in a culture now where a lot of us are being actually validated and affirmed by endlessly doing all of the time. Our nervous system needs those moments to be in peace, to be in calm. Our body also needs to, at some points, move to discharge its energy. So by building in, as I often, we talk about in my membership, the Self-Healer Circle, a commitment to shifts, small daily promises to create new habits. Because of course, I even just, voiced 3 different things we could start doing differently. We have to understand that, especially when it comes to our body, especially when it comes to our nervous system, a lot of us, for very understandable reasons, want to reshape our life, want to start eating differently, start sleeping differently, start moving differently. And because our subconscious mind will always register the unfamiliar, or will always register the possibility of threat, I should say, in the unfamiliar, the more expectation we put on ourselves to revamp our life overnight, the more likely we're going to feel that resistance, to feel uncomfortable, and to return back to those old habits. So by caring for our body might mean making a daily commitment and getting really consistent with maybe eating in a different way, sleeping in a different way, allowing rest in a different way. And then over time, the more we're caring for our nervous system, the more then we have access in those moments of reactivity to return to that peaceful balance that now we've been practicing outside of those moments.
The The small but consistent actions that you take are what changes your reality. That is so true for our manifestation process. The more consistent you are with the unblocking work, expanding, and then taking that aligned action, it overwrites your neural pathways to high self-worth, and thus you manifest. And the same is true for your probiotic. Constantly taking a regular science-backed probiotic is going to change the way that your gut functions. Seeds DS-01 Daily Symbiotic is a pre- and probiotic formula that has 24 clinically and scientifically studied probiotic strains to promote whole body benefits, including regularity, ease of bloating, immune support, gut barrier integrity, skin health, and heart health. I personally take 2 capsules of seed every morning with a cup of lemon water to start my day, and it has made such a difference, specifically with my digestion and regularity. I've taken so many different probiotics throughout my life and over the years, and none has compared to seed. It really is the top of class when it comes to a pre- and probiotic. And part of that is because Seed truly cares about the science. It was developed in collaboration with Seed's scientific board. It's based on their foundational work in probiotics and their work in the microbiome. They have new clinical trials and breakthrough research being published in top scientific journals. They really care about understanding the gut, the microbiome in the gut, and how pre- and probiotics play into the impact that causes. They also really care about the planet because they're extremely sustainable. They give you 1 glass refillable jar, and then any monthly packages they send out are completely compostable and made from plants. And like I was mentioning in the beginning, pro and prebiotics work best when taken consistently. That way you can continuously populate the part of your colon and digestive tract that needs those pro and prebiotics the most, thus supporting you most effectively. So I notice for sure when I am taking them consistently, I have my daily symbiotic practice, just like my daily manifestation practice, I see the most results. So trust your gut with Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic. You can go to seed.com/magnetic and use code 25magnetic, all caps, MAGNETIC, one word, to get 25% off your first month. Again, that's 25 MAGNETIC, all caps, to get 25 off your first month, or check the link in the show notes. Talk a little bit about the allostatic load and the cumulative burden of chronic stress going kind of in the other direction. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important for people to know, to identify this almost window of tolerance and how much just stacks up, almost how numb, I almost want to say, people become to how much they're actually carrying.
I'll start with the last thing that you said. People become numb to how much they're carrying because they have never been taught to be attuned. We live in a world that's highly, highly disconnected from itself, that its constituents are disconnected from themselves, and we don't have a protocol put in place at key moments of our lives when developmentally we're learning ourselves, like in school, that helps us to understand how to check in, how to have body awareness, how to know when our belly is feeling upset because we're actually worried, how to tune into that pain that we feel in on our shoulders and the possibilities that could be connected to the very rough day that we just had. So as a result, there's all of this that's floating around in this vast, vast world. And we have so many people that are walking around without that understanding and knowledge of the fact that we have a body that wears down because of stress. And the allostatic load is, in essence, the neurological wear and tear meter of the body. And it maintains our capacity for stress. And whenever it's overloaded, it actually can dip us into allostatic overload. However, with time, too much of that can actually start turning into physical disease because our organs start overproducing some of the hormones that are not healthy for them. Our bloodstream gets impacted by the allostatic overload. Our brains start pruning away very important brain mass and neurons. Like there's so many ways in which all of the stressors that we undergo through life are connected to how much our bodies are taking in and how worn down they feel. And eventually, that contributes to physical disease, which is why the stress disease connection is so incredibly important, why it's important to teach in medical school, why it's important to teach to other medical specialties, and why it's important for everyday people to have an understanding around.
What are some tools, techniques that you use that you see the most results from that really help the nervous system rebalance to offload some of the stress that might be built up?
The tools that I gravitate towards the most, both in my personal life and my professional life, and that I like to almost kind of like reiterate whenever I'm in conversation with folks, is they're tools that are accessible. They're easy for all of us to get to. It's deep breathing. It's deep breathing in a way that also takes into account how much we need to pour into that practice. It's the deep breathing that isn't just 3 breaths or one random session with someone that does breathing coaching. It's not that. It's a lifestyle change. It's deep breaths on a daily basis that are taken for a minimum of 5 minutes so that the nervous system can actually register that you are helping it to heal, to restore, and to feel calmer. And so deep breathing is one. Another one that also helps us, within the nervous system in fairly similar ways, perhaps a little bit less effective than breathing, but still effective enough, is rocking. Rocking is a ventral vagal stimulation practice that offers us an opportunity to also stimulate that cranial nerve that is primarily responsible for rest and relaxation within our nervous system. The same with humming, similar effect as rocking. And so we have these practices, breathing, humming, rocking, that are fairly accessible to most humans, breathing being the most accessible. That actually helps us to have in our back pocket tools that we can access when we're catching the bus, when we're in between meetings, when we're waking up, when we're going to sleep. And we don't have to worry about, did I schedule that yoga practice? Did I schedule that sound bath meditation in the studio for a week from now? We actually get to do this work on a daily basis and do the reparative work that our body needs at the pace that it needs, which is on a daily basis. And the reason why I emphasize that they need to be a lifestyle change is because it's almost unfair to ask a person, when you're most triggered, put this in place. Because biologically, it's going to be harder for them. Biologically, their actual body and their nervous system are invested in protecting them at that moment. So they're not going to have some of the mental faculties that they're going to need to actually engage in the complex thinking that is required for them to actually identify that they need to breathe, rock, and hum. So if that's the case, one of the things that I learned in one of my trainings that was more cognitive behavioral in nature was this concept of building mastery. And building mastery is done through engaging in the practice that we hope to build mastery around when we're least triggered and engaging in it on a continuous basis. That means that we do deep breathing when we don't need it, when we're actually calm, when we've just woken up, or when we have a calm moment in our day, and we engage in the practice and we engage in the humming and we engage in the rocking in the moments when we don't have any kind of trigger stimulus around us. We do it when we're simply training our bodies to default to that. When we need it, then we would have easier access to the tool because it's just become so prominent in our thinking. The science also tells us that body memory can be built within 300 to 400 repetitions. We have 365 days in a year, and within those 365 days, we create a lifestyle practice of integrating body-based practices that help relieve the stress that our bodies are absorbing in this fast-moving world. Imagine Imagine how different our bodies can be, meaning that our bodies, are, of course, depositories for a lot of our stress and trauma. Imagine the difference that a year can make in engaging in these kinds of practices.
And I think so many people are on, their own healing journey with different modalities, whatever they're doing. And one of the obstacles is that when it starts to get really overwhelming and really scary, or things feel heavy, they're like, oh, that was too much. And they put it away, and they, don't run back to it, or they won't look at it for a long time. But if you have a practice that can help your nervous system, a tool to go back to, a resourcing of sorts, that you can have as you're diving in. Talk about the still method. I think this is incredible and so helpful for people who are just going through a lot, pulling back their history and their traumas and everything that they've gone through too.
Yeah, and still is yet another technique that involves that concept of building mastery. And it stands for stop, temperature, inhale, lay, launch. And what it means is that whenever we experience something that can be distressing in any way, first we imagine a stop sign. We freeze in place. We don't do anything that can jeopardize relationships, that can jeopardize, any kind of job or any circumstance that's in front of us. We instead freeze. We go somewhere where we can have access to cold water. Maybe it's a bathroom, and splash cold water on our face, or just allow cold water to run on our hands. If we have access to a fridge, grab a piece of ice. Anything that can actually get us into a part of our bodies to feel a sense of cold. Now, the ultimate way to do this is to take a cold water plunge or to dip into cold water. That would be perhaps less accessible at all moments of life, but definitely the best thing to do. And the reason why we introduce cold temperature in this way is because it actually helps us to release endorphins that can help to increase our capacity to be calm in the moment. Beyond that, we have to inhale, meaning take those deep breaths in the ways that I noted, not just 3 deep breaths, not just 1, but 5 minutes worth. Lay is meaning you just exit the space that you're in. If you have the capacity to do that, go lay down, sit down somewhere else, just distance yourself from the situation until your nervous system has gotten a chance to catch up to itself, until you've taken those deep breaths, until you've actually engaged in, some of that cold water stimulation. And then launch is the final step, which is a re-engagement back into the situation. So it's coming back into the conversation, coming back into the circumstance, but this time with a nervous system that feels more settled. And if we practice this time and again, you could just be literally in your living room, no one's around you, and you can say, you know what, I'm going to practice still right now. I'm going to go imagine a stop sign. I'm going to get some ice and hold ice in my hands for a minute. I'm going to inhale for 5 minutes. I'm going to go sit down and map out a place where I can sit if I ever feel triggered. And in that, I'm going to enter circumstances differently. And it's something that we can build mastery around. So when the circumstance does present itself, then you have an opportunity to more readily come to the skill.
I love that the last step of it too is the launch, to re-engage back into it, because I think that is where really the real healing of whatever the moment was triggering can happen.
Yeah, the purpose is to always come back to connection. It's to always re-engage. It's to always find a way to address whatever has been left unaddressed when we exited and we started envisioning the stop sign. It's always to come back. We can't just drop off, right? Self-soothe and not come back to relationships. The relationships are there. They're on hold and they're waiting for us to say, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to have the conversation.
And so talk about norepinephrine. Am I getting correct? Talk about that and what that's doing in the brain, how we utilize it, what's going on there.
So norepinephrine is the brain's version of epinephrine or adrenaline. So it's the same molecule, essentially. It's just that it's a neurotransmitter in the brain. And then you've got adrenaline in the body. Now, people tend to associate stress with bad stress. But the thing is, we need an element of norepinephrine release, an element of acute stress, so that we can, have these conversations, so that we can learn, so that we can concentrate, so we can run, so we can do all these wonderful things that require us to be in a sympathetic state. Now, the problem is that when we remain in these states of stress, so it's one of the things that I teach my clients, and I go into corporates and I teach about this stuff all the time, is that we want to be able to regulate from the stress, because we're always going to deal with stress, but it's about how we regulate from it so we don't linger in a state of stress for the whole day and then let it ruin the rest of our day, let it ruin our evening times with our families. There's an amazing work going on at the moment by Elia Crum. She basically looks at stress mindset and how when you tell people that stress is really bad for them, their heart rates go up. And when you tell them that stress is really good for them, in the same study, their heart rates and blood pressure comes down. So they're having a different physiological response to their belief around stress.
Wow. Okay. Now, guys, think about it. What did you do? How did you feel when she mentioned that stress was good? And how did you feel when she said that stress was bad too?
So stress, can be good or bad. It's but if whether we can use it to hone in on whatever we're doing. So, I'm currently stressed, but actually I'm writing a book. So I know that this is going to be great. I can use this as fuel, but then making sure that I really regulate from that when I come home from my working day for writing, because, we don't want to stay in a state of stress.
Yeah, like even the creative process, when people are in, whether they're writing a book or they're creating art or they're on set for a movie or, any kind of creative form, there is that sense of stress. New ideas are coming through. You're like, how am I going to get it onto the canvas, whatever that may be? There's a channeling process going on in the body. You don't even think. I know a lot of my friends are musicians and they're like, I will be so in the zone that I will forget to eat. Like they can't even remember. And then they're like, oh, shoot, I just totally messed up my system and body. Like, why did I do that? But they're in that kind of acute stress, really in the zone, very productive. But I think kind of the goal is then how do you rebalance? How do you make sure you're getting nourished when you have those moments as well?
Yeah, so, coming home, meditating, unwinding, anything that works for you, taking these kind of breaks throughout the day that I was talking about, where you meditate in the daytime, doing the pauses where, I've just experienced something really stressful, but I'm going to do the breathing, the double inhale with a long exhale to just get my nervous system back down, and then reframing that stress as well, so reframing it to see that actually you could be adaptive towards the stress. You can use this as fuel, because then that also empowers you to be able to switch off from it. Because that's where the caveat is that people can't switch off from their stress because they see it as something awful. And don't get me wrong, stress can be awful, especially if you're going through, something like a divorce that doesn't go away, or, illness or whatever. These things are obviously harder to manage, but making sure that we have those buffers in place, like sleep, meditation, journaling, exercise. If you're going through a very stressful period, I would encourage lighter exercise, maybe something like walking, swimming, yoga, instead of, unless you're somebody that's a conditioned exercise goer. But, exercise helps us separate the pathways of stress. So what I mean by that is, I want you to think about a boxer in a boxing ring. When they're in the boxing ring, they are able to stay really mentally calm while their body's rampant with adrenaline. And that is because they've practiced that so many times that they're able to separate those two systems. So by voluntarily putting ourselves through stressful situations that are positive for us, and again, reframing them for ourselves, so exercise is good. That's why people who hate exercise have such a hard time with it, because they see it as such a negative thing. It's associated to negative aspects of it. But people that love it, and people that can see it as like a positive thing in their lives, they can then translate that into their day-to-day basis. So what that means is the threshold for stress goes up. So now all of a sudden you need more things to trigger you before you sort of blow up or go into a state of panic.
So it's almost like exercise is that acute amount of stress, and it will help us basically discern like, okay, this is an intentional 20-minute workout where I have that acute stress. And when I'm done, I can calm down. That's why I love when, especially in yoga classes, they'll do meditations or shavasana at the end.
Yeah.
Because it like fully, I feel like a whole nother person.
Absolutely. So yeah, we call it hormesis. It's basically putting yourself through voluntary stress acutely, and it's something that if you had to do for a very, very long time would probably be not beneficial for you, but in the short term, it's very good for you. So things like breath work, things like saunas, cold showers, exercise, even fasting. I don't really talk about fasting all that much because there's a whole lot of mental stuff attached to that. But for anyone that does well with it, it's the same concept. So we're putting ourselves through stress, but it's voluntary stress where we're in control, we know we're safe, and then we can regulate that from that very quickly.
Does that help with the neural pathway of safety? Because that's one big thing is like returning to that baseline of safety, knowing that you're safe, especially when we're in moments where we are safe, but our emotional brain kind of takes over and is like, but what about all these worries? But in the moment you're safe. If we have that acute stress and then we come back down and regulate again, does that help strengthen the neural pathway of like, okay, safety is with me. I'm okay.
Absolutely, because it gives you a sense of control. You're taking your body into a stressful situation, but you're in control of it, and then you can regulate back down. So over time, you're essentially teaching your central nervous system that this is safe.
By now, you're starting to get the feel for TBM. Maybe you've heard about our workshops and you're interested in manifestation, but you just don't have the time or energy to sit down and do self-help work. We totally get it. In fact, that's why we created the Daily Practice, which is our massive library of self-hypnosis tracks that you can do anytime without having to jump into a workshop. We call these tracks our Deep Imaginings, or DIs. DIs are different than normal meditations because we designed them using a combination of self-hypnosis techniques, deep theta waves, EMDR-informed tools, and somatic experiencing. A fully loaded formula that is scientifically proven to help you clear your blocks and triggers on a subconscious level, giving you the power to actually create new neural pathways in your brain. So if your boss pisses you off, use our Trigger DI. If you want to feel magnetic before a party or an important meeting, use the Magnetic Self DI. If you're feeling anxious or down on yourself or you need help making a decision, we've got a DI for all of these scenarios and more. You can get full access to the Daily Practice inside the Pathway membership, where you'll also get unlimited access to every workshop, tool, and offering from TBM. The tools in the Pathway membership will support you year-round, whether you're in the worst, a rock bottom, or second worst, a rut, or feeling good and you want to keep the magnetism going. In the Pathway, you'll effectively learn how to become your own manifestation coach, all for less than $1 a day. So even if you're not ready to start a workshop, join the Pathway and start rewriting your neural pathways now to create magnetism. Work through your triggers and get closer to your authentic magnetic self in order to manifest.
And we have our big summer sale going on right now where you can save $96 off of your membership. Be sure to check the link in the show notes or go to our website, tobemagnetic.com, to check out the sale.
Now back to the episode.
Talk a little bit about the resourcing component for people here. How does the nervous system play into being able to face our fears and move through them and then take action on the other side? Because you could face your fears, be like, okay, I'm ready. And then when time comes, the fear strikes back up again. You're like, I don't know if I can do it. How can people really have a practice of regulating their nervous system to prepare them for anything that comes on the other side?
Or why does it matter? Because if you're someone like me, I understand now why it matters. But if you're someone like me who's an Aries Mercury and an Aries Venus who just like wants it now, let's do it. Why does it matter, Janelle, in this process?
Yeah, because we can't metabolize it. Having a regulated nervous system and having regular resourcing practices allows you the space to even be honest with yourself. Like if you're not resourced, you're not going to even be able to name that you're in fear. You're going to be disassociated from it. So it's a pathway to authenticity. It's a pathway to processing trauma. It's a pathway to presence. It's a pathway to connectedness. You have to have a container to even be able to lean into these really hard, uncomfortable edges that we're all leaning into, even to be able to ask, is this ego, we have to be resourced enough and connected to our soul to even be able to get to that answer. It's foundational for everything.
And I love that you say, like, you can't renegotiate trauma if you're in fight or flight. So that's for me, who's someone like, oh, I have to take this extra step of like getting grounded and resourcing and regulating and then work on the trauma. But what I found, and correct me if I'm wrong, Janelle, that each time I resource, it's like a muscle memory. It becomes quicker and quicker and quicker that I can regulate a lot faster and go, oh, this is what 0 is. Now let's dig in and talk to my inner child. Let's get to this root. Let's unblock it. And that's so important because like what I'm learning, if you're not regulated, but you go in and you try to do the unblocking, you're not going to make a neuroplasticity impact really, like as pressing of one as you could be making.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going through the motions. And then when you recognize, oh, I'm really present. And wow, that DI was different. Why? Oh, I was really present for it and I was regulated for it. Then when you go back and you just go through the motions, you're like, that was dumb. Like, why was I like, it's kind of like, okay, hold up. You really can feel the difference of actual presence and regulation versus when you're more disassociated or disconnected.
That puts words so well because there have been, I would say 99% of the time, every time I do a DI, there's some profound healing moment and shift on the other side, like in real life after. But there are sometimes when I do, I'm like, dang, that wasn't the best one I've done. Like that felt like very much going through the motions. And now I know why. It's because my nervous system probably was not regulated enough to jump into it, depending upon what I was doing. But I usually try to go to like the most heavy hitting ones all the time. So I probably needed like a little reset DI that day or a magnetic self DI or a safe DI before jumping in and processing everything too.
It's also worth noting, if you're someone like me, this doesn't just apply to when you're triggered. It's also when you're like, you've been doing too much. You're so vata. You're like, oh, I've been doing this. I'm on Instagram. There's nothing about you that's fight or flight. You're still in fight or flight in a different way. Yeah. You're not in your parasympathetic. So it's like what I'm learning through doing is when I'm actually in my parasympathetic, I can actually metabolize what's going on, go deeper, make an impact, because it's like, who wants to waste the time doing all these DIs if they're not doing anything? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like if I'm doing one, I have such limited time. If I'm doing one, it better work. It better be impactful for that 15 to 20, 25 minutes. You know, I want it to be a big unblocking, you know, as the step of unblocking, expanding, and aligned action.
That was one other thing I wanted to share on here. Janelle, you talked about it when we were working through and crafting the DIs, but for one person who might be in fight or flight, it's about like calming down their nervous system. That's why I have so much breath work and kind of visualizations and stuff like that. But for someone else who's in a freeze or fawn state, I'm now recognizing the moments that I get into it. It's usually when I'm on like autopilot, like doing something over and over again, or like numbing out on something. I'm like, oh, I don't feel like I want to move my body. I want to just like be still. That's actually a freeze response. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's interesting because so much of what's out there is just like calm, 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 calm. But you can go too far on either spectrum. So when someone goes into a little bit of a dip of a trauma vortex of a freeze response or fawn response and they live there regularly, they do need more activating energy. That's the one where it's like, it's hard to get up and work out or move, or it's like, to me, it's like pulling a boat to get into the flow of the river again, that they're stuck. So yeah, it's like depending, you just have to have the evaluation of, have I been kind of like shut down, I guess would be a good word. Am I feeling really shut down or numb or really more apathetic or detached? That's when you can kind of bring a little bit more activation, movement, breath work to back in, to kind of get back into, okay, wait, we're up, we're alert, we're here. And that can be really helpful versus somebody that's really, like Lacey was saying, just like, you know, cracked out kind of energy where you're just, you know, yeah, you need to actually soothe and regulate, calm. And that's when all those other tools are helpful. So yeah, it goes both ways.
I think that's so interesting. And it also makes so much sense of the times where I'm like, I don't feel like I can move my body and work out. It's like, oh, because I can't jump from feeling frozen to a whole HIIT workout. I need to warm things up a little bit and get back into my body and the movement of everything.
Right.
What are any other self-regulation tips or tools that you have when some of those bigger emotions come up?
Yeah, definitely breathing. Now, one of the other things is hobbies. So bearing in mind what I've just told you about the brain and how powerful our thoughts are, if we go home and we're still thinking about our stressful events at work, so say you got into an argument with a colleague, your brain is still perceiving to be in that place because it can't always necessarily, now there's nuance to the statement, tell the difference between reality and imagination. So if your brain is still thinking about that on a primal level, it still believes that it's under threat. So having things like hobbies means that we can actually step away from that for an amount of time. So we can actually allow our stressful biomarkers to come down. And they've done research on this where they basically put people on a sofa after a stressful event and told them to be calm. And they told other people to play Tetris. And the group that had to play Tetris recovered from the stress a lot quicker because they weren't thinking about the events, whereas the people on the sofa were still ruminating over it. So the ones that came back from Tetris meant that they could sort of think about the event without the added stress. They could consolidate that event without sort of the fear and stress attached to it. They could make sense of it. So you kind of like rationalize it with a more logic mind. So I think hobbies are really important. And I think, with people who are doing the work with TBM, that is a perfect time to kind of see that as a hobby. Like that's my hour or whatever, however long it takes after work or, maybe at the end of the day to do the work so you can completely immerse yourself in something else and not worry about the sort of day stresses, if you will. A lot of people will kind of throw themselves into social media or something else, which they think is kind of taking them away from the problem, but it's keeping them in a state of kind of like arousal and irritability. So it's not helping the problem. So the hobby needs to be something that's kind of nurturing, for lack of a better term, something that's going to help you really kind of recover from the stresses. Maybe something like, I don't know, knitting or like you said, Sudoku, yoga, jiu-jitsu. A lot of people that I work with do martial arts or whatever it is, running. Something that's really going to take your mind off it, but it's going to be beneficial for your mind as well, because social media is not going to master it. Well, it will temporarily, but it's kind of like putting on a very bad Band-Aid.
It's perpetuating.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Hypervigilance. So talk a bit about what it is, how it's essentially formed, and how people can start to recognize, because I think a lot of people pleasers, people that identify as empaths, might have hypervigilance and not really be aware of the impact that is actually having on their nervous system. I know for me personally, it was a big aha moment when I recognized, oh, if someone is in a bad mood around me, I actually don't need to fix it. I can allow them to be in their own mood and not run to, try to manipulate the situation so everything feels peaceful again. I can feel peaceful and they can have their own separate experience and we're good. But feeling like I needed to do that was a learned behavior. So talk a bit about that too.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great example. Those of us who are really sensitive to shifts in people's mood, shifts in people's tones, shifts in people's behaviors, right? We're always looking outward. We're always scanning the environment. Maybe it's internal. We're always worried about what other people are thinking, how they're feeling. It could be more something that's happening internally in our mind. And to speak to your point of it being a learned behavior, chances are in childhood, if your environment was unpredictable, if you had that explosive parent, being attuned to their cues, their shifts in moods helped keep you safe because you could leave the room, you could avoid them in some way, or you could not do the thing that might result in them being explosive was probably your best strategy.
That is so key to remember. All of the sort of programming that comes up for everyone, all of the behaviors that are coming up, I think having the moment of compassion, and you talk about compassion a lot, but having that moment of compassion that this was serving me. I did need this to survive in the environment. This was the best solution to the situation that I was in. And now it's not serving me anymore. And how can I move it? Because I think without having that compassion, we're like, oh God, I have so much shit, or I have all these problems, or, so you can start to see how it can turn into that self-shame. And I just want anyone out there listening to really take in that actually was a benefit to you at one time, and it's okay. And now it's about the consciousness and reprogramming that.
And to take it a step further, because, right, it kept us safe, our subconscious, our neurophysiology, our body is still reliant on that for safety purposes. So it's not going to go away overnight. You're not going to, again, listen to us speak about this and be able to get rid of that habit, unless, of course, you learn other ways to create safety for yourself, your body. Again, I very intentionally created a workbook about how to meet your authentic self. And you don't get to meet that authentic self until section 3, because until, again, we're connected with our body, we know how to create safety in our body. We begin to explore our emotions and these deep-rooted patterns that our inner child and our ego is holding on to, coloring all of these moments of reactivity. We're not going to have that space. So your point, I think, is so important, Jessica, to reiterate, which is that because it is aimed at safety, we don't want to get rid of it overnight. Our body, our nervous system won't allow us to until, again, we teach ourselves, our physiological body, how to find safety in other ways. Again, this is where we can't just white knuckle it and be like, okay, well, whether or not I can be compassionate and remove the shame, I still want to stop doing it. We have to embody new choices, do new things with our physiological body, with our nervous system, before we can release those patterns. And I think just coming from a traditional world where we had this idea that we could just talk about something in a therapy session, again, if we had access to it and have some new insight, and then therefore actualize that by doing something different. The big piece that was missing, at least in my work, was the body, the actual making of new choices to retrain my nervous system in new ways to feel safe. Because again, it won't get rid of it until we make those new choices.
I guess it's different for every person, but what would be your protocol for someone who in that hypervigilant state, right? They typically mesh with the other person's need, they put them before them, and now they're aware of it. They're, okay, I know why I did this. This happened in childhood. Got it. Makes sense. And now they're faced with an opportunity to repeat that cycle, continue that pattern, mesh with the behavior, or they can say, oh boy, my body feels so uncomfortable doing this, but I'm going to go take my own energy. Is it the action, and then the action is uncomfortable at first, and eventually after self-soothing, then it can become safe feeling? Or is it a combination of, here are the tools I can do to feel safe, get that baseline bolstered, then when the situation arises, then I can go and, take that new action?
Yes, it is having the awareness that it's a pattern, creating the opportunity to know how to create safety in our bodies, and then also navigating the narratives in our mind. Because chances are, if you're like me, making those very beautiful, empowered moments to separate your energy, to go do the new thing that's going to create safety, we still have all of these beliefs and these narratives literally in neural networks in our subconscious mind that's going to tell you how selfish it is to do that, how it's wrong, how you're a bad person to do that, how guilty you should feel for doing that. So it's working with the body. I know we've been focusing on that, but also the mind, right? So for me, I'll just share my examples of, I could logically know that I'm a mesh, that I need to create boundaries, that I need this time away to learn how to ground myself in my own energy. And in the moment of doing that, all of those stories, all of those narratives can come washing over me of how it's selfish, how dare I have a need that's different from what someone else. They could need me in this moment. And now I'm being a bad friend, a bad partner. I feel guilty. I used to call them my feel bads, and they're still very present. So it's all of it. So the practical kind of tool in the moment is first to be aware of what your mind is telling you, all of this old deep-rooted belief that you've been operating from outside of your awareness, even maybe celebrate that you're able to see those feel bad thoughts or those guilt-inducing thoughts or those shaming thoughts, and then learn how to refocus that attention away, not spending time thinking in that thought loop, refocusing your attention maybe on your physical body and the shifts that you're now starting to feel on something that is now in your external environment. And chances are you're going to have to do that again and again, because again, like that light switch, my thought's not like, oh, you don't want to feel guilty right now? Okay, I'll just let you be, do your thing, right? The next reminder of how you're a bad person, how you're a selfish person, how you shouldn't be doing this. We all love to think in shoulds and shouldn'ts, comes up in your mind. And then you could use that beautiful muscle of attention and say, thank you, thought, just like my body, you're trying to keep me safe, right? You believed that being enmeshed with this person was safety at one point. And now I can put my focus somewhere else. And then over time, then you get to feel differently in mind and in body in those moments. And again, bringing it full circle, and in very many ways, I still see that tendency to feel bad, to feel guilty, to feel that discomfort in my body and in my mind. And just like we're teaching our body to expand in terms of discomfort, we're teaching our mind to do the same.
I'm in awe of so many people on this journey, because to think that you are facing your innermost demons and then have the system that maybe wasn't working, or was broken in some way, shape, or form, then fighting back at you for trying to find your own peace. It's like, dang, that's hard work. And I just give so much just awe and credibility to everyone who's out there doing this journey. I think it's so brave and so powerful.
I couldn't agree more, Jessica. And I always like to acknowledge, especially when I have the opportunity to speak to other communities, of, how important it is to honor yourself in this process. Even the fact that you clicked onto this podcast today, the curiosity of listening to what for some of you might be really new ideas, that's very brave. Listening to things that are, again, unfamiliar to us might challenge our deep-rooted beliefs, might then, if we do actualize and begin to behave differently, it is incredibly courageous. And I think some of us so frequently skip over that step of being like, wow, good for me that I'm willing to hear these things, to take a look at myself in a new conscious way. And then even furthermore, to begin to act differently. Again, we are all humans. We all share that universal desire to stay in that familiar. So all of this, anytime you're faced with something new, thinking or doing something new, it is incredibly worthy of celebration, in my opinion. The more we make space for our reality and we honor that, and then we do show up more in alignment, it is just creating that ripple of change in your world. And in my opinion, it's something to celebrate, to honor. And again, in my opinion, it is how we create change, literally world change.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode as much as I did. And if you are starting to get a taste for this To Be Magnetic work, or maybe you want to join our upcoming summer challenge, or even just try out our new Regulate DIs, the fight or flight, the freeze or fawn, which will help get you back into that nice, calm, regulated state, you can join with our big summer sale going on right now for $96 off. It is a limited time sale, so be sure to join before it expires.